Good morning, class, and welcome to your first lesson. I'm Professor Bongo. Yes, that's me. As you can see, I am the instrument, not the animal. Also, not to be confused with Dr. Bongo. That's a whole other guy entirely. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about philosophy, and our method of learning will be via the tier list method, which I think is the future of pedagogy. This is mainly in response to this Duncan video here. See, class, Duncan might be what you call a simp, and I in particular have some grievances with where he places certain philosophers on his tier list. So let's just jump right into it. Okay, so like Duncan, we're gonna start with Socrates. Yeah, there are some other guys before him, like the turtle guy and the guy with the catchphrases, but for all intents and purposes, Socrates is a good guy to start with when making a philosopher tier list. Okay, so Socrates. Yeah, a little overrated. I mean, the guy basically just asked a bunch of questions, which if you want to imagine what he was like, just picture a kid, like, hey dad, why is the sky blue? Or, hey dad, why are you always crying? Or, hey dad, if God is benevolent, then how do you explain the existence of suffering? Dumb stuff like that. So yeah, kind of annoying. I think in D tier for Socrates. All right, next we got Plato. So yeah, I'm gonna say he's a little overrated. So for those of you who don't know, Plato's two main things are the cave allegory and the theory of forms. And so I'll start with the cave allegory, which is basically a dumbed down version of the Matrix, and frankly a lot less cool. So in the cave, people are like doomed to watch puppet shows forever, and they're not even the good ones like the Muppets. It's probably like something really outdated like Avenue Q, Then if you like leave the puppet show and you go like actually touch grass, you'll realize that there's better content out there than just puppet-based media. But also this fact will be so woke that no one will believe you, and you'll forever be labeled as cringe by the cave people. Kind of dumb. I mean, you can see how this is basically the Matrix but worse. Now his theory of forms, you could say, is a little more interesting, but honestly still pretty bad. Like, just kind of a bad take. Basically he says that you can draw as many triangles as you want, but they'll always look kind of shitty, and like it's super hard to draw a good triangle. But the fact that we even know what a good triangle would look like proves that it exists, like somewhere, and that somewhere would be the world of forms. So yeah, I'm sure you can already tell how this theory is pretty sus, because I mean, how can something exist if you can't see it? I mean, if this world of forms is like a real thing, where is it? So yeah, pretty dumb, but at least he's trying to give answers, so I'll say low C tier. Okay, after Plato's Aristotle, which makes sense. I think he's like Plato's son or something. Anyways, as Duncan points out, you can see in this painting that Plato's here pointing at his sky triangles while Aristotle's pointing down at like the worms and stuff. And so yeah, that pretty much sums him up. He just liked science and worms and that kind of thing. I'm not sure if he really had any effect on the history of philosophy, to be honest. So I'm gonna say he's pretty overrated, probably D tier with Socrates. Okay, now we have Aristippus the Younger. Aristippus the Younger is probably not well known enough to be overrated, so I'd say he's just accurately rated. He and his granddad were advocates of a specific kind of hedonism, one in which only your present state of pleasure ever matters, and so foregoing pleasure in the now in order to reap higher pleasures in the future was a super dumb idea to them. So this basically means that if you're lactose intolerant, you shouldn't let that shit stop you. Go eat all the cheese you want. Who cares what crimes will be committed in the bathroom later? Only your present cheesy pleasures matter. So that's obviously pretty dumb. I'm thinking F tier. Okay, next is Confucius. So I'll just get this out of the way. Confucius is pretty overrated. I mean, the guy's name is basically confusing, so you should be pretty aware what you're getting into with him. Basically, his whole thing was being a big narc, because he really liked kings and laws and all that. He was also known for writing these things called aphorisms, which are basically like the top ramen of philosophy. Easy to make, but not very satisfying. His most famous one, often called the Golden Rule, do not do unto others what you do not want done to yourself, is so simple that my mom was able to come up with it too. Yeah, this is F tier. Next up we have Laozi, founder of Taoism. Yeah, so Taoism is actually pretty chill. It's pretty much the anti-tryhard philosophy, and it's where you get the idea of going with the flow and that kind of thing. But Laozi can be pretty annoying with his weird paradoxes, like when people see things as beautiful, ugliness is created, or being and non-being produce each other, which to me sound like things that would be reposted on r/IM14 and this is deep. But overall, Laozi seems like a cool guy. I'm thinking C tier. Avicenna. So if you're watching this after taking only intro to philosophy, or after watching just any YouTube video about philosophy, you've probably never heard of this guy. And while you might think that's because he's Persian and English-speaking culture has a bias towards Western European philosophers, you'd be wrong. It's actually because no one knows if his name is actually Avicenna or Avicenna. And at this point, everyone is too afraid to ask. Well, anyways, I definitely have not read anything by this guy, but his Wikipedia page says he's been called arguably the most influential philosopher of the modern era, which I don't know. That's a pretty big claim, and frankly makes him sound pretty overrated. Cool name though. I'll say C tier. Okay, here's Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic guy. So this dude is kind of based because even though he was hella wealthy and stuff, he said, hey, fuck that. You don't need money, just chill. And then he kept all his money. Pretty big power move, but still, I'm gonna have to say he's a little overrated because Stoicism is really boring and generally not a thing that can help you in life really at all. D tier. St. Thomas Aquinas. Yeah, so when you think of medieval philosophers, chances are this is the only guy that really comes to mind. His big thing was mixing Aristotelian philosophy with Christianity, which we all know are two terrible schools of thought, so by default, this guy gets F tier. Okay, so next we have Machiavelli. Yeah, so this guy's famous book is The Prince, which I was supposed to read for AP European History, but I didn't. So I can't really tell you that much about this guy, except for that I'm pretty sure he's like the Game of Thrones guy. You know, the type of guy who would be advising Tywin Lannister, like he's all about being ruthless and kind of badass. So anyways, Game of Thrones was pretty cool. Definitely could have been an S tier show, but then the last few seasons really sucked, so sorry, because of the ending of Game of Thrones, Machiavelli gets an F tier. Alright, next we have Descartes. Pretty famous guy, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say he's pretty overrated. Even though everyone knows his catchphrase, I think, and that means I am, or as philosophers call it, the incognito mode. Yeah, but honestly, it's not really saying much. Basically, he couldn't come up with anything cool, so he just says, yeah, you're alive, and you expected all of us to be like really surprised about that. Pretty lame. And if that's all he had, I'd give him an F tier, but at least his proof for the existence of God is pretty much as tight and irrefutable as an argument can get. So for that, he gets bumped up to C tier. Alright, Spinoza. Super overrated, basically a glorified hippie, F tier. Okay, so in the middle of this period where a ton of philosophers are wondering if we can ever really know if the world exists or if everything's just an illusion and all that, we get John Locke, who honestly is kind of based. He basically started throwing hands at these other skeptical philosophers and pretty much said, the fuck you talking about? Of course the world exists. It's right fucking there, dude. So that's cool. Honestly makes me think he's like an A tier, but then he wrote some political stuff that's pretty boring, and he also outs himself as a lib, which is pretty cringe, so I'm gonna say D tier. Okay, next we have Berkeley. Insanely overrated, very expensive, cloudy all the time, and they rejected me. F tier. Hume. Okay, not gonna lie, could be the GOAT. It said that his favorite thing to do is go drinking with the boys and just completely obliterate them at darts, like on a nightly basis. Just straight up slamming bullseyes all the time. But when you start reading what he actually wrote, he sounds a lot less based. Hume says that, okay, say you're playing with a yo-yo, and you know how you are like positive that the yo-yo will fall when you drop it because of like gravity? Well, Hume says, actually, you can't know that it'll fall. You can just think it's really, 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 really likely it'll fall because it's done so all the other times you drop it, which to me makes him sound pretty annoying. So yeah, pretty overrated, D tier. Alright, so next we have Kant, who in my opinion is pretty overrated. So this guy's all about his allegorical narrative. So this involves him narrating to us that an action is only justified if you could reasonably will the entire world into doing it too. So among other things, this leads him to saying that lying is always a moral wrong, no matter what, because a world where everyone lied all the time would be really annoying. But I don't think you need me to tell you how dumb that is. I mean, if an axe murderer comes to my home and asks where my family is, isn't it morally right for me to lie and say I've been trained in the art of the axe, and therefore he shouldn't try to mess with me, lest I expertly counter his axe attacks? Yeah, so the only cool thing Kant has ever brought into this world is this graffiti right here. Other than that, he's just a nerd with a big forehead. F tier. Okay, time for the big sad boy, the mutton master himself, Mr. Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer is sort of overrated, to be honest. His philosophy is basically just a ripoff of Buddhism, which had already been around for hundreds of years. So yeah, not much to say about this one. I'm thinking D tier. Next up, we got Hegel, who is probably nowadays best known for inspiring memes about how hard it is to read Hegel. Yeah, so on that note, I'll say right off the bat, I've never read this guy, but I've definitely read his Wikipedia page at least twice, so I think that makes me about as qualified to talk about him as anyone else on YouTube. Anyways, the first concept of Hegel's that's important to know is the idea of Geist, which in German roughly translates to ghost. Hegel believed that all human consciousness coalesces in a single entity, a big giant ghost, not unlike the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. For Hegel, this big ghost is responsible for all major events in human history. For example, he was the one who stabbed Julius Caesar, beheaded the French nobility, and was lead art director behind Cubivore for the GameCube. I've always liked Cubivore, and I think it's a severely underrated game, so I'm gonna have to give Hegel a high C tier. Next is Kierkegaard, who is actually the first Danish pope. Definitely impressive, but doesn't really have anything to do with philosophy. F tier. Okay, class, so this next philosopher is pretty obscure, but I think despite his small influence, he's pretty interesting. Karl Marx. So there are a few buzzwords associated with this guy. Let's look at these first. Okay. Alienation. Marx talks a lot about alienation, but what does it mean? To Marx, alienation is the ideal state of mankind, where after we make contact with extraterrestrials, we will be able to form an alliance with them, or an alien nation, if you will. This communion between us and the aliens is what Marx dubs communism. Also important to note is that in this nation, there would be no capitalists because the aliens won't know what money is. And to Marx, capitalism is when you buy stuff, but if there's no money, then you can't buy stuff. Therefore, no capitalism. Now you may be wondering, hey, isn't this the guy who invented the Soviet Union? To which I'd say, yes, but that was an accident. Anyways, D tier. Nietzsche. Heidegger. So the main concept you need to understand for Heidegger is Dasein, which roughly translates to racism. Needless to say, I think we have ourselves another F tier. Freud. Okay, class, so I know you all probably think of Freud as the mother penis man, and you would be correct. Weird but memorable, D tier. Next up is Bertrand Russell. Okay, so this guy's a little overrated. Basically, he just took Noam Chomsky's shtick but made it British. D tier. Wittgenstein. A joke you might hear about this philosopher is that he's actually two philosophers wrapped into one. And the reason for this is because he was really tall. Generally, tall people are better than short people, so I'll put him in B tier. Sartre. Sartre was a French existentialist, which means you really wouldn't want him in your intro to philosophy class. He's famous for the line, "Hell is other people," which is important because many scholars see it as the moment it became cool to call yourself an introvert. Obviously, that was an L for society, so I'm thinking F tier. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone was an existentialist who wrote The Second Sex, a book about the subjugation of women and how they're basically seen as an afterthought to men, which judging by how she is the only woman on this tier list, she was probably right. B tier. Philosophy Bro 911. Okay, so this dude's got it all figured out. I saw his post on Reddit the other day and I thought, damn, this guy is smart as fuck. I honestly don't know why he doesn't make it onto more tier list videos. This guy is an easy A tier. Okay, class, so we only have one more philosopher to add to our list today, and I think you're really gonna—
Every day I spend my time drinking wine, feeling fine, waiting here to find the sign that I should take it slow. Off again, there he go. Don't have to dimension my mind. Body's all in prison, my eye. Probably going ballistic, but listen, I'm missing a couple of screws. They never do drilling, you been slipping away at the truth.
S tier.